Can I borrow a Thule? Let me get that 4.0. Everybody asking me for my Thule makes me kind of sketch. I'm your N, I need it. If anything happens, you're not going to be involved and you're going to get it back. If anything happens, you're not going to be involved and you're going to get it back. If anything happens, you're not going to be involved and you're going to get it back. For centuries, young males were fascinated with guns. Probably before that it was swords. I don't know why it is, but it is. And in November of 2016, Erick Almandinger had a gun. It wasn't a pretend gun. It was a real gun that was going to have real consequences. These kids referred to it as the Thule. In November of 2016, Erick thought he was the baddest and the coolest and the smartest 16-year-old around. He dressed like in the latest LA gang fashions. He flashed gang signs. He posed with a gun. He thought he had cool friends. And on November 13th of 2016, two distinct kinds of friends showed up at Erick Almandinger's house. On one hand, there was David Grunwald, all-American kid, nice family, loving home, steady girlfriend, had his own bank account, saved up and bought a car, all-American kid. On another hand, another group of kids showed up. What did the kids have in common? They liked Erick's marijuana. So the so-called cool kids, they were at the opposite of David Grunwald. On again, off again homelessness, all kinds of family problems, committing other crimes. They were badder than Erick Almandinger, and they were certainly badder than David Grunwald. And somehow they both ended up in the same trailer. There was no plan for them to be there that night together, but somehow they ended up together with very tragic consequences. You're going to see and hear a lot of really difficult things during this trial. But I think the thing that's the hardest to hear is you're going to see this series of text messages where you see these two groups that should never be together converging. You see David Grunwald's text to people that are ultimately going to result in him ending up at his friend Erick's house. They would normally play video games and smoke marijuana. You see that sequence of events, and you see a sequence of events where the so-called cool kids decide they're going to show up at Erick's because they want to smoke his marijuana also. And you see these, here now, and it just feels so preventable. You could just insert like one text and stop it all. But you can't stop it all. These groups came together. So what happens that night? David Grunwald ends up in the trailer with Austin Barrett and Bradley Redfro and Dominic Johnson. Erick's outside the trailer. And Dominic's begging Erick for the Thule. And Erick stupidly gives it to him. And for no apparent reason at all, Dominic bashed David Grunwald in the head with it. Austin Barrett helped. The Thule's not the only gun involved in this case. There's also the 9mm. How do we know the 9mm is involved in this case? As you heard during the state's opening statement, there was a shell casing recovered from David's body. The shell casing is from a 9mm. What does that mean? That 9mm was the murder weapon. Now the 9mm was recovered from a backpack at Devin Peterson's house on December 6th of 2016. What else was in the backpack that the 9mm was in? This watch was in that backpack. It's a distinctive watch with the ram's head on it. This guy wearing the watch, that's Austin Barrett. That's the one who shot David Grunwald. What else was in the backpack? Austin Barrett's hat. The troopers would trace that 9mm. Guess what they found out when they traced the 9mm? It was sold by a teenager named Garrett Canada to guess who? Austin Barrett. When Austin Barrett shot David Grunwald, Erick Almandinger was 16 years old, and he was in this in-between world between being a teenager and being an adult. And he played this stupid dress-up game. Only to some of his friends, it wasn't a game. He thought it was cool to dress up like an LA gangbanger. Let me introduce some of the friends. You saw the pictures of them during the state's opening. There was Devin Peterson. Unlike Eric, who was 16, Devin Peterson was 18. He came to Alaska from the lower 48, and he's probably the one that introduced the Crip culture to the valley. And people like Eric looked up to him. There's Bradley Renfro and Dominic Johnson. They were 16 like Eric. There's Austin Barrett. What else do we know about Austin Barrett? He was 19 years old, and he was hanging out with these kids. On December 2nd, Erick Almandinger got interviewed by Trooper Wegson. And during that interview, Eric said it best. David Grunwald was a good kid. Those kids in the trailer with David, they weren't good kids. So how do we know what happened? There's no video of what happened. Eric, after lying to the police for a long time, finally told the police what really happened. For no reason, David Grunwald was pistol whipped by Dominic Johnson and Austin Barrett. And Eric didn't stop it because he was scared. He didn't help. He gave 2 directions in the car. He was too scared to stop it. Erick Almandinger lied a bunch of times. He lied to the police. He lied to David's friends. So why should we believe Erick Almandinger now? Because what he said on December 2nd to the police is corroborated by the other evidence. The transfer of the .40 caliber to Dominic Johnson is corroborated by the text messages. The fact that Austin Barrett had the 9mm is corroborated by the fact that the gun trace goes back to Austin Barrett. And this is also very important. The police don't get the gun until December 6th. On December 2nd, Eric tells the police it was Austin Barrett that shot David Grunwald. So the question is, why didn't Eric stop it? And it's kind of hard to explain. He was in a group. He's not thinking clearly. He's going along with it. And he's scared to stop him. Does it make sense that Eric would be scared? Well, what else do we know about the other kids? Dominic Johnson's much larger than Eric. Austin Barrett's 19 years old, unlike Eric, who's 16. Both of them are armed. How do we know they're armed? The 9mm is Austin Barrett's gun. The transfer of the .40 is corroborated by the text messages. Now, not stopping this, Eric's not stopping this was bad. It was morally wrong. He should have stopped it, even if he was too scared. But not stopping something bad from happening is not the same thing as having the criminal purpose to murder somebody. Not stopping bad not stopping something bad from happening doesn't make one guilty of murder or an accomplice to murder. Not stopping something bad from happening, and this is the worst thing that could happen, obviously. It wasn't criminal. But several things Erick Almandinger did were criminal. He covered up what Austin Barrett and Dominic Johnson did. He lied to the police. He helped set the Bronco on fire. And Erick's guilty of crimes for every one of those things. But it's important to keep in mind that Erick's crimes all occurred after David Grunwald was killed. The trial's a little bit unusual because I'm conceding that Erick is guilty of the crimes that occurred after David was killed. And it's also unusual because I don't think there's going to be a lot of contested evidence in the case. Let me give you some examples. There's going to be DNA evidence in the case. It's not surprising. David Grunwald was in the trailer. We're not contesting that. There's cell tower data where I could do a cross-examination to maybe argue that the cell tower data is not reliable because if one cell tower cell tower data is how you trace where a person's been. But if one tower is busy, then it bounces to the next tower. So it's not totally reliable. But in this case, it's reliable. It shows their movement. I'm not going to contest that kind of stuff. There are a bunch, because Erick was there for all of this. So there's a bunch of things that we're not contesting. We're not contesting that David was pistol whipped or that David was shot in the head. I hope you're not expecting me to do some brilliant cross-examination to show that the police officers were lying. We asked that question to everybody in voir dire. This isn't a case where I expect the police officers are going to lie. What do we think about the job the police did in this case? Police did an excellent job in this case. What do we think about the job Trooper Wegson did in this case? He did an excellent job in this case. He collected physical evidence. He collected scientific evidence. He knew immediately who the people were that were involved in this, that were there with David. He questioned. He caught Erick in lies, and he questioned some more. Great job. There's no, this police officer's lying or this is a frame. There's not going to be any of those things. A lot of the evidence in this case is not contested. Now, in some sense, there are times where Trooper Wegson lied, and he lied when he was questioning Erick on December 2nd. And you're going to learn, if you don't know already, that that's a perfectly legitimate thing for law enforcement to do. They're allowed to lie about what evidence they have or what they know in order to get a suspect to talk to them. And Trooper Wegson did that in this case. I am not going to argue that there was anything wrong with that. It's a perfectly legitimate law enforcement technique, but when you're watching the tape and you hear some of the things that are said, just keep in mind that the trooper is allowed to feign and say that they have certain evidence that they don't actually have. It's legitimate, and in this case it was actually effective, because by doing that he got Erick to finally say what really happened that night. We talked about in voir dire about the protections that people accused of a crime had. And those protections are there for a reason. They're there because we don't tolerate convicting an innocent person of something they did not do. Erick Almandinger is not guilty as the principal. What do I mean by that? He's not the one who pulled the trigger. Erick Almandinger is not guilty as an accomplice. Why? Because he did not have the criminal purpose for David to die. He did not have the criminal purpose to kill David Grunwald. All of Erick Almandinger's crimes occurred after David Grunwald was killed. Let me get that Thule. If anything happens, you're not going to be involved, and you're going to get it back.
We got it at the optimal setting.
So we're all good with the notice? Give everybody notice, cell phones? Okay. Okay. I don't see any issues, anybody doing anything, but if you spot anything, let me know. Let me go on record first. Okay, we are now on record in 3 PA 16-2575, State of Alaska versus Erick Almandinger. Are the parties ready to proceed with the trial this morning?
Ready, Your Honor?
We're ready.
Okay, I will call in the jury. Do they got their notebooks? Psst, hey, psst, they have their notebooks? I can't see. Okay. We're now set to begin the trial this morning, and I believe the state is ready to do their opening statements. So you can begin.
Thank you. Good morning. Palmer, Alaska, and other parts of the Matanuska Valley. Why do we like living here? Probably because of the natural beauty, the lack of traffic, the down-to-earth people, the Alaska rituals that go along with the change of seasons. Could be also just running into people you know at the grocery store or at the post office, extending all of those trips. And also, and most importantly, it's probably watching children grow up, children that you've seen in the past, see them growing up and maturing. Young David Grunwald liked living in the Palmer area very much. He had a lot going for him. He had a good home. He had good parents, loving parents, structured parents. He had friends. He was a good-looking young man. He was smart, and he also had a good work ethic. He had a very nice girlfriend. He had a driver's license and a vehicle, a 1995 Eddie Bauer Ford Bronco, which, as all of you know, is very important to a young man. He was working, it was an older vehicle, he was working on it with his dad, as have most young men during the course of their life. It's almost a rite of passage. He was in the Matsu Ski and Snowboard Club. He was taking flying lessons. He had big plans, and he had even bigger dreams. And though David was serious, he also had a lighter side about him. He probably got that from his dad. He liked telling jokes. He liked telling tales. He liked entertaining people when the time was appropriate. Ladies and gentlemen, this all crumbled on November 13th, 2016, both in Palmer and in the Butte. And like many other terrible incidents, this could have been avoided. And had one circumstance been a little bit different, had something not happened, or had he not gone someplace, we might not be here today. November 13th, 2016 started out oh so normally for the Grunwald family. David was with his girlfriend, Victoria McKelkey. He was with his family. There was some shopping. There was some driving around in the valley. There was eating. It was a totally normal day. But later on November 13th, 2016, David Grunwald was defeated by them. The them that I am referring to are Erick Almandinger, the defendant in this case, Dominic Johnson, Austin Barrett, and Bradley Renfro. Those are the them that I am talking about. David Evans was also part of them, as you will find out during the course of this trial. David Evans, who was part of them, communicated with David Grunwald and asked for a ride. So this started out innocent enough, and he asked for a ride to defendant Erick Almandinger's house. Now, David Grunwald agreed because he was taking Victoria to her mother's house, which is in the same area where Erick Almandinger lived at the time. Erick Almandinger lived in the home of his father and grandmother in that area behind the Tsunami Center, behind Noisy Goose. So it wasn't much of a thing for David Grunwald to say, yes, I will take you to Erick Almandinger's, to David Evans. They had obviously known each other before. Now, while David Grunwald was dropping David Evans off at Almandinger's house, David Evans just threw out an idea to David Grunwald. He suggested that David Grunwald come back and hang out with them. The David that's not part of them had to pick Victoria back up at her mother's, then drop Victoria off at her father's. And David Grunwald decided that he was going to come back and hang with the boys, as he told Victoria. So he was assuming that he was going to go back there, and it was a Sunday night, so he wasn't going to hang with the boys for a long time. But he was assuming he was going to go back there and have a little bit of fun before he went back home. David called his mother and asked for his curfew to be extended slightly, and his mother agreed. Now, there's something David didn't know when he was going to hang with the boys. David didn't know that these are the boys that he was going to go hang with. The kind of boys that wear gang attire, blue clothes, blue bandanas, which is related to the Crips gang. The kind of boys that party, the kind of boys that flash the gang signs all the time, the kind of men who have toolies, which means a gun. So this is, unbeknownst to David, these are the boys that he was going to go meet on that particular evening at the Almandinger residence. Now, when he went there, some of the gang, some of the group, some of them were already there hanging out in a trailer. Dominic Johnson, Bradley Renfro, and Austin Barrett were hanging out in a camper trailer that was located at the Almandinger property. And they were there partying, smoking marijuana. Erick Almandinger's father, Rodney Almandinger, was home in the house, and Erick Almandinger was home also. The marijuana, there was usually no shortage of marijuana at the Almandinger home since Rodney Almandinger grew marijuana at the time. Unbeknownst to David, when he joined them in the trailer, he didn't know that they were hatching a terrible plan. And the terrible plan that they hatched was to beat and torture David Grunwald. Around 8 o'clock that evening, there were communications between Dominic Johnson and Erick Almandinger. And the communications related to Dominic Johnson asking Erick Almandinger to bring his toolie, to bring his gun, which was .40 caliber Ruger semi-automatic pistol, into the trailer to pistol whip David Grunwald. There was another gun on the property at the time, a 9mm Springfield Armory, but it had a polymer frame, so it wasn't heavy enough. So Dominic Johnson is communicated with the defendant in this case for the defendant to bring his gun. And they are using some of their lingo. Johnson says that they're all at the camper per the plan. He says, let me get that 4.0, which means the .40 caliber Ruger. There's some further discussion, and then Johnson tells the defendant, well, I gotta act fast, like right now, fast. And he asked Erick Almandinger, do you feel me? And Almandinger responds, yeah, I feel it. Almandinger got his toolie out of his house, brought it to the trailer. The beating with the gun was horrible. David Grunwald had to go to the bathroom in the trailer. And when he came out of the bathroom, he was jumped, he was ambushed, and he was pistol whipped by them. Blood was coming out of his head. There were deep wounds inflicted upon his head. And then this group, including this defendant, made a unanimous decision. And that unanimous decision by them was that because the beating was so bad, because the gang beating was so bad, they could not leave a witness. So they made a unanimous decision to kidnap David, take him to a remote location, and execute him. So as David was bleeding and half conscious, they stuffed him into his own vehicle, into the Bronco. They made him identify which bloody key was the ignition key to the vehicle. They broke his phone so nobody could communicate with him. And they thought of the best place to take him to kill him, the best remote place that they could think of at the time. And that was going to the Butte, specifically to the Knick River Road in the Butte. This is approximately a 20-minute to half-hour ride to get from where they were to the Butte. And during that ride, David was basically pleading with them. Please drop me off at my girlfriend's father's house. It's on the way. Please let me go. Take anything you want. but they would have none of that. They ignored all of his pleas during that 20-minute ride. They parked the car in a pullout at about mile 7.3 of the Knick River Road. They got him out of the Bronco. They all marched him into the woods, and about a football field's length into the woods, while he was begging for his life, their designated shooter shot a 9mm bullet into David's brain. As David's friends, girlfriend, and family members were going out of their mind with worry, they, and as David's body was freezing to the ground in the woods, they got busy destroying evidence. The first thing they did was they drove David's Bronco to the Meadow Lakes area, but to a specific location. They drove it to the home of Devin Peterson. Devin Peterson was basically their gangster role model. He also fancied himself a Crip, and he was the best person to go to for advice as to what to do. When they got to Devin Peterson's house, there were discussions. They also got a gas can, and they also dropped Austin Barrett off at Peterson's house. Maybe it was because Austin Barrett didn't want to be caught with the rest of them in the Bronco. Maybe it was because Austin Barrett was the shooter. Maybe it was because he had blood on his hands or on his body. Maybe it was because his part was getting rid of the guns. Or maybe it was just because he was going to spend the night at Devin Peterson's. The rest of them, after they dropped Austin Barrett off, traveled further. They went to the Holiday gas station. And Bradley Renfro walked into the gas station, gave the clerk a $20 bill to buy gasoline, got his change, and went back out. They filled the gas tank with gasoline. Dominic Johnson was actually on the phone with Devin Peterson, his advisor, when the gas was being pumped. And then they traveled to the other most remote place they can think of, on the other side of the valley from the murder scene. They traveled to Sightsee Road. To get there, you got to go take the little bridge that goes over the Little Susitna River and go through that neighborhood, and then the road eventually turns into a trail. Almandinger, Renfro, and Johnson took the Bronco there. They poured gasoline all over David's Bronco, and Almandinger torched it. So now obviously they can't stay there. They have to do something else. So they made it back to Palmer through a combination of walking first in that remote area, walking down Sightsee, and then eventually made it back to the bridge. And then they used their devices to contact the cab company, and Scott McCormick, a local cab driver, picked them up. He took them and dropped them off roughly in the area of Pioneer Pizza. And then eventually all of them made their way back to a different trailer and a shed, not the one at Almandinger's, but a place in Equestrian Acres. And that was a place where Litza Bledsoe lived, and she was friends with them at the time. And then Austin Barrett, the other part of the group, eventually made his way back to that location also. So during this time, while parents are frantically calling everybody they knew to find out what happened with David, they thought that David might have gone off the road, might have crashed, might have been in a ditch someplace. While Victoria McKelkey is texting everybody that she could think of, texting David Evans, texting Erick Almandinger, who told her that he was drunk in Anchorage at a party. And then eventually, while other people were searching for David, this group carried on like nothing had happened. They resumed their normal routine. There was joking and smoking. There was partying. They were partying to the point of inebriation. There was carrying on like nothing ever happened. Now, despite them resuming their routine, or better yet, I should call it their lack of routine, they did get busy with a few other things. They took the time in between partying to bleach the trailer at the Almandinger property so that the police couldn't find David's blood. And they also took the time to burn a rug that was covering the bottom portion of the trailer so the police couldn't find David's blood or DNA at the trailer. Now, getting back to their role model, I already told you there were two guns involved in this. The Ruger 40 caliber is down here, and that was Almandinger's Thule. You'll see him with photos of the gun. And this is the murder weapon, the Springfield 9mm pistol. And we know it's the murder weapon because when investigators went out to the murder scene, and I'll cover that later, they found a casing that matched the Springfield Armory 9mm. These guns, they gave them to their advisor, their role model, Devin Peterson. And he was supposed to get rid of these guns. But either because of fascination with guns in general or mere procrastination, the troopers got those guns. They applied for a search warrant for Devin Peterson's home. And they got there and they searched the home. And in a backpack, in a bedroom, they found these two guns. Eventually, the focus here turned to finding David. And obviously, the troopers got involved. They didn't have much luck in finding David. They were making significant efforts every day to investigate this case and locate David's body. And there was still hope out there that maybe, just maybe, David was alive. There was a significant event on December 2nd, 2016. Before that day, the investigators had asked the DA's office to pencil in a grand jury date for them for a grand jury investigation to be conducted. In other words, for witnesses to be called in, for witnesses to be examined in hopes of solving the case and in hopes of finding David Grunwald. On Friday, December 2nd, 2016, during the afternoon hours, an attorney contacted Sergeant Wegson. John Mark Peterson contacted Sergeant Wegson, and he said that his client, Dominic Johnson, one of them, wanted to do something to help in the investigation. And that something was that Dominic Johnson wanted to take Sergeant Wegson to the location of David Grunwald's body. This, was met with a little bit of suspicion at the onset. The conditions of this was that, number one, that Dominic Johnson could argue that he cooperated if he ever was convicted and sentenced for his role in this case. And number two, that he wouldn't make any statements during that afternoon. So on that afternoon, John Mark Peterson got into the car with Dominic Johnson, his client. Sergeant Wegson took a separate vehicle. There were a number of stops and a number of places searched, and there was a lot of looking. And it wasn't looking very good. There was snow on the ground, and there was snow in the forecast, and it was getting dark. And then just before the search was going to be concluded, after 3 in the afternoon, Sergeant Wegson took a few more steps in some thick woods for some reason. Something told him to take a few more steps. And he looked past a log and he found David's body. David's body was frozen to the ground and covered with snow. It was obvious it was David. He had the same clothes. He had the slippers right next to his feet that he wore on November 13th, 2016. And when the troopers came out there, the rest of the investigators came out there. Obviously, it was an all-night proposition. They came out there to examine the scene and use the metal detectors. They found a 9mm casing from that Springfield Armory pistol, which was found at Devin Peterson's house, fairly close to David's body. Now, you hear that I am using the words they and them, but you only see one of them in this trial, Erick Almandinger. The law is equipped to handle situations where a serious crime occurs and there is solidarity and secrecy regarding that crime on the part of a group of people, a cloak of secrecy and solidarity. As I mentioned to you in jury selection, that's Alaska Statute 11-16-110. I've already read it, but I have to tell you in this opening what we intend to prove during our case. This is a tool that we will employ throughout the entire trial. And it says a person is legally accountable for the conduct of another constituting an offense if, with intent to promote or facilitate the commission of the offense, the person either solicits another to commit the offense or aids or abets the other in the planning or the commission of the offense. You sit here as a group, and we will prove in this trial that the murder of David Grunwald was a total group effort by them. Ambushing David, pistol whipping David, stuffing him into his own vehicle while he was bleeding and pleading for his life, driving David to the butte at night, marching him into the thick woods, shooting David while he was begging for his life, covering up the crime, destroying evidence, lying. First thing the defendant told to Sergeant Wegson when Sergeant Wegson started digging into the case, even before David's body was found, was that he took a cab to Anchorage to go to some party. and the group effort of basically thwarting the investigation, making it to the point of making fun of the police officers that are investigating. The defendant even made a statement that he was a genius, and the cops, basically saying the cops wouldn't catch him. And also deleting, the group deleted a large amount of communications between them after November 13th, 2016, but not all of them. We will prove that they, as a group, and this is the real group, not the first group you saw, they as a group made unanimous decisions to do all these things. And also, we will prove to you during this trial that they felt super comfortable with their decisions, very at ease with their decisions, as if it was totally natural for them, as evidenced by their continuing associations, continuing their routines. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, we will prove that as a group, they destroyed David Grunwald, and they permanently damaged all of David Grunwald's family and friends. We will prove that this defendant, Erick Almandinger, is guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, first-degree assault, vehicle theft in the first degree, and arson in the third degree. Most importantly, we will prove he is guilty of killing, as a group, he and all the others are guilty of killing David Grunwald on November 13th, 2016, just as he advertised himself prior to the murder. Thank you.
Okay, at this